All right, my name is Stephen Palmer. I'm the lead of the build pipeline and asset bundle team here at Unity. We happen to live and work right here in Austin, so I'm able to have my whole team here with me today. And a couple of them, Joe and Paul here, are going to help me demonstrate some new stuff we've been working on. Before I do that, I just want to give you kind of a roadmap of the talk. First, we're going to review some of the challenges with building and loading content in Unity. In the past, I've done this presentation, and I haven't. Basically have had to do that and stop because we haven't had anything to show. But we actually have a demo today to show you how we're solving these problems. So I'm happy about that. So we're going to introduce our solutions to some of the challenges you face and give you a demo of those. And then we're going to talk about challenges with like iterating on changes on deployed platforms like mobile devices. And then we're going to introduce another feature that we're working on called Fast Deploy and Live Preview. And then finally, we'll get a short demo of the Live Preview feature, and we'll have some Q&A. So let's get started. So what are some challenges with building and loading content in Unity? I've sort of broken it down into a few categories here. The first one, and most important one, I think, is there's just a really steep learning curve. There's many ways to load content in Unity, and often the most obvious way to do it and the simplest way doesn't end up being the correct way for shipping a game, particularly for larger, complex projects. And to kind of demonstrate this in a visual format, particularly on your first Unity project, before you've learned by experience, if we look at kind of development time versus complexity, you start out by learning about direct references, assigning things to scenes and just loading them. I'll show you that in a little bit in code. That's simple. Then you learn about resource folders and how to use resources, and then you learn how to use asynchronous loading from resources. And that's basically what you do for a long time until you realize that there's some problems with that if you actually want to ship, particularly if you want to deliver content dynamically after you ship. So we introduce asset bundles, which are quite complex in and of themselves. And then there's all these other kind of issues around asset bundles that you have to figure out and learn. And anyway, it gets hard pretty quickly. So another challenge is, and then that kind of leads to a lot of refactoring in your code as you work through these different and various ways of loading things. So I'll kind of walk through this. You may have seen some of this at GDC this year if you saw my talk there. But like week one, select screen. Week one with Unity, it's simple. You learn how to do direct references, and you can instantiate game objects. Very simple. Then you learn about resources again, very simple. You just load something by name. Code's very easy. And even the asynchronous version is nice and simple in terms of just code complexity. Simplest way is to use coroutines and you barely have to change anything. So that's how it goes. And then, so with asset bundles though, you all of a sudden have to now create your own build scripts, which you may not have had to do before. This is just a little snippet of some. And then you have to refactor that loading code again to load from an asset bundle. But it's actually a little bit worse than that because asset bundles actually have dependencies, so you have to load all the dependencies first, then you have to load the thing you want, and then you have to load. So anyway, and I see you guys taking pictures of the code. It works, but it's not shipping code, okay? It's example code. I actually don't want you to write this code.
That's why we're here.
So we're here to talk about what we think is a pretty good solution to this. We call Addressables and the Resource Manager API. So Addressables are basically, if I had to sum it up, it's our replacement for resource folders. That's just as easy to use, but far more powerful, and it provides you a seamless transition into the world of asset bundles. And then the Resource Manager API is a new kind of unified loading API that works with addressables, and it gives you a lot of cool features. I mean, it automatically handles dependency loading, reference counting. It has a built-in profiler, and you'll see some of this in action here in a little bit. If there was a Unity marketing guy here, he'd say, it's easy enough to use the day you start and good enough to use the day you ship. So, but there's no marketing guys here. So, demo time. So Paul is going to give you a little simple overview of the addressable system.
Hey, everybody. So what we have here is one of our sample games. And this game was set up to use asset bundles to load in characters dynamically. We've gone ahead and stripped out all of that code, all of the old asset bundle manager code. And so we're at basically a clean slate, and we have no characters. So let's see how to set this up with the new addressable system. The first thing we need to do is find our character right there, and we mark it as addressable. And once something is marked as addressable, we can give it a name. I think a good name for this guy is going to be cat.
The default name is like the path of the asset.
Right. It would be the path that is normally used to load from a bundle. So now that we have this asset marked as addressable, let's go ahead and see what's needed to hook this up in code. And this is a class that was previously loading asset bundles and loading characters and registering them. And what we're going to do here is some simple code, basically resource manager load. We want a game object. We give it the name that it has now, which is cat. And we will add that character, not that. OK, pretty much the same way it worked before, pretty simple. Let's go ahead and run the game and see how this works. All right, we're in business. We are using addressable assets. All right, so we have this addressables window. And what we're going to do now is let's go ahead and add another character to this game because I think it needs more variety. So just add this guy right up here. And now we have two of them. Instead of loading these by their address, we're going to use a new feature, or a feature of this, to basically label these as characters. This is a configurable, user-defined list of labels that you can apply. And once we have that, we can change the code a little bit. So let's go ahead and get all of the addresses of everything in the system with the label character. And so this is going to return a collection of string addresses. They are typed, so the system supports different types. And then we're going to go ahead and load these. So we'll just go ahead and get all the prefabs. And now, since we're not hard coding, everything is set up to load all of the addresses that the system has given us with this label. We're good to go. There is an easier way to do this. What we can do is we can actually just call the, let's see, resource manager. And let's go ahead and load all of them. But let's go ahead and load them asynchronously, because that's going to help us out later. Load these all as game objects, and we'll just pass in the entire collection of addresses. OK, so this is going to go through the addresses that are passed in, load them all asynchronously. And the thing is, we need to actually do something when they're done. So what we'll do here is go ahead and add a completed event. And we'll just do some inline completion there. And when these are finished, we basically want to register them the same way as before. So we'll just go through all of the objects in our, this is the operation that's passed back, and it contains the result, which is a collection of game objects. Yes, thank you. OK, and then we'll just add that character. And we'll go ahead and set our loaded state to true. And we don't need any of this code anymore. All right, so now we have a system set up to query the system for all of the addresses with a label. We're loading them all asynchronously and then registering them when it's done. Pretty straightforward. Let's go back and see how this works. All right. Okay, 2 characters. Awesome. All right. So these assets are added to this local group, which is asset bundles. They're already in bundles for you. They are packaged with the game in the streaming assets folder. But let's say we want to move one of these characters to a different bundle group. Maybe we want to download it later. So we'll go ahead and create a new group. And we'll this remote group. Let's move the raccoon here. Maybe we want downloadable content for him. But what we've done is basically just drag that asset into the different group, and let's see what happens. Go ahead and play. And now we have just changed from having all of our assets bundled with the game to having some of them local and some of them loaded remotely. These can download from a server asynchronously, and nothing needs to be changed in the code. Okay, so next thing is, let's see, we've determined that this loading screen, while it looks nice, these two the animations in the background are maybe taking up a little bit too much space. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and delete those out of there so that we have a small initial download. And I've got an object that I've got here with a script, just a background loader. We're going to see what we can do to load these dynamically. And this script is pretty much empty. So we're going to add, I'll make these public, a couple asset references, one for the environment and one for the animation. All right. Now, once we've added those, we've got 2 new properties. And this is a drop-down that lets you select any addressable asset. It kind of behaves like the direct references, but these are a little bit different. Let's go to these prefabs that we previously had in the background, and we can just take the animation, drag it up there, take the environment, and hook it up there. And what you see what happened is this created addressable entries in the system. And so now these can be loaded. And I think what we want to do is let's leave the environment bundled with the player, but let's move the animation remote because it's not quite as critical. And for this remote group, we're going to change it from bundling these all together to making a bundle per entry. But before we go much further, let's go to the code and see how we actually use those. So I've got those two properties here, and in order to use them, we're just going to instantiate them. Let's do it asynchronously. And we have our game objects. And since those will just instantiate and go into the scene, we don't need to do anything further.
So that will go through the whole loading process for those assets first, and then
Exactly.
just instantiate them.
Yeah, it'll load dependencies. It will load the assets, instantiate, and nothing further needs to be done unless you actually want to get a callback with the instantiated object. You can add that here, but we don't need that for this. Okay, so now we have our assets set up the way we like them. But before building bundles, let's go ahead and see what this is going to create. So we can go to this preview tab and click refresh, and it goes through part of the process. And so we see here we have a default group. These are the things that will be bundled locally, and then 2 remote groups with our separate assets.
I think it was a good place to mention, we have a brand new build pipeline also that this is built on, and one of the nice things about it is it's split up into multiple stages, and one of them is it actually calculates the entire bundle layout ahead of time. So we're using that to show you exactly what's going to go into these bundles before you even have to actually build them and write them out.
Right. You can expand these and see all of the assets that this will pull in as references to the explicit assets. Okay, so let's go to our config page. And so up to this point, we've been running in what's called fast mode, and this is for quick iteration, entering play mode. If you want to see how the game behaves when you're loading all these things asynchronously, we can go ahead and build the bundles. But we don't need to do that. We can use what's called virtual bundles. And what this does is it builds all the dependency information, builds the tables that represent asset bundles, and we can actually simulate some of the load speed delays so that you can see what happens when things take a while to download. And so once we're set up with that, let's go ahead and run the game. All right, so the game's going. Here's the background. There's the animation. And there's our characters. Nice. OK, so another tool to help with seeing what's going on is the resource profiler. And this is a profile window that shows per bundle and per asset when load requests happen, and when they complete, where they're loaded, how they're loaded. So this is very, very handy for that. But to look at the profiler, I'm going to switch projects here to look at something that is a little bit more interesting. So here we have the Viking Village demo, which many of you have probably seen. And what we've done is taken this scene and run it through a custom script that strips out all of the assets in the scene and makes them prefabs, adds them to the addressable system, and we've put in these proxy objects that basically just have the bounds of what was there and the transformations and things. And then these proxy objects will use the resource manager to dynamically load and unload the assets as they go in and out of view. And just a quick peek at what that code is doing. We're basically instantiating and releasing. And what that does is lets the system manage the ref counting and everything needed to manage the memory for the assets and the bundles. So let's go ahead and watch this in action. I'll open up the profiler, and let's go. And I have the download speed simulating at a slow speed, so we can see things kind of popping in and out. And as you can see here down in the profiler window, you have different assets and different bundles loading in and out. There's a graph per bundle. There's a graph per asset. You can see the dark colors are where the request is still outstanding. It turns bright when the load has happened, is completed. We can actually pause this at any point. We can double click to expand. We can check out the child assets in this bundle. We can see ref counts. So the green is ref counts that are on both the assets and the bundle themselves. If you have a bundle with multiple assets, when the assets are no longer needed, the bundle's no longer needed, and it will be unloaded automatically for you. We can take a look at per frame events. These are all the events that go into the system. We have a bunch of load asynchronous, instantiate asynchronous calls. We can see what type of asset it was, what its address was, where it was downloaded from. We can see that these assets will load and then unload when not needed. So that's pretty much it. And that's the end of my demo. Back to you, Stephen.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
OK. Do we need a video switch? OK. We'll just leave this running.
Get back to my spot here. No, wait. Yeah, so wait. Go ahead and switch back. Step out of here. Oh, it is working. So that was our demo of addressables and resource manager. So the third area we want to talk about in terms of challenges you face loading content is that over time things kind of slow down. I'm sorry. That's better. The third area that's a challenge in loading and addressing content in Unity is that over time things slow down. And particularly iteration time is what we're talking about. As your project complexity increases, as you add content, it just gets harder and slower to see your changes. Now, with the addressable system, you noticed that we actually never built any asset bundles. Like, we never actually had to do any building in order to kind of preview and see exactly how the bundles were going to be built, how the content was going to be laid out. And you can work this way in play mode for quite a while and really kind of hone in your layout before you ever have to build. So that's one way that we can increase iteration time, by giving you tools in play mode to help you simulate exactly how everything's going to work. But eventually you do have to build, and you do need to deploy to devices. And at that point, usually you do have to build everything and deploy everything at the same time. So what we're doing is we're going to help you with that by introducing a new feature called Fast Deploy and Live Preview. And to help me talk about that, Joe's going to come and first kind of talk through what that is, and then he's going to hopefully give you a cool demo of that working.
Hello. Hey, everyone. I'm Joe. And so I'm going to be talking about Fast Deploy and Live Preview, like Steven mentioned. So the goal of this feature is to help with the iteration process, and especially on mobile devices. So just real quick to walk through what the current iterative process is on a device is, usually we'll make modifications in the editor, you'll create a build, you'll deploy it to a device, start up your app, and navigate to where you need to test, and then observe your changes. Currently, making modifications is pretty good in the editor, but there's a few pain points in some of this process that we're going to be addressing. So the first one is creating a build. Right now, as you guys know, when you create a build, you end up building a whole lot of assets and making this giant build. There are some workarounds to reduce that, but that takes a long time. Sometimes it can take up to hours. So we're going to be addressing that. Deploying to a device, you then have to upload that very large package to your device, which can take a while. And then you have to restart your app. You have to navigate to that change where you want to observe what you changed. And depending on your game and what tooling you have, that can be pretty tedious. So real quick, how we're going to address those pain points. When you create a build using addressable assets, we're not going to, when you have the Fast Deploy feature turned on, we won't actually build any asset bundles for you at build time. Those are all going to be built on demand from the editor when they're requested by the player. And this means that when you deploy to the device, you're not going to have a giant APK file or package file that you're uploading to your device. You're going to upload this very small package, and all that data is going to be available over the network. And then for restarting your app and having to re-navigate to that point of interest, we're going to introduce this feature called Live Preview, which will let you swap out assets immediately when you change them in the editor, or as soon as the editor re-imports them. If the device has those assets in use, then it's going to upload them and swap them out on the fly right there, so you don't have to go through this process. So going back to this chart of where we're at now, we want to get to this point where you're just making modifications and observing them instantly, and the create, build, and deploy, and that sort of stuff is just one time. So that's kind of the goal. Real quick on how the live preview works. So you're going to launch on your device, modify your assets in the editor, and then the editor is going to build those modified assets, and then the player is going to download them and reload them. And then you're going to get a user notification, like a callback that you can hook into. For a lot of assets, such as like textures or models, we can just seamlessly swap out the two assets, the old one with the new one. and your game will just work fine. But in some cases, like let's say there's a prefab and you instantiated that prefab. Well, if I swap out the prefab under the hood, you're going to need a callback so you can do any sort of game logic to update any instantiations of that prefab that you've created. So we're going to have a little tooling for that. And OK, so now I'm going to show you guys the live preview demo and see how that works.
I think you're going to have to switch your computer to. You're going to switch it to mirror.
Oh, crap.
There you go.
Good this time.
So. Just hit escape on the slideshow.
Okay.
There you go.
Cool.
Yeah, I know that guy.
All right, so just real quick what the setup is here. I took the game that Paul was modifying and turning it over to use the resource manager, or addressables, and just made a couple modifications to it. So you can see right here we have some addressable assets. The cat's there, and I added this new one called gameplay tweaks, which is a scriptable object. It's in the asset folder. And then I just launched this with the fast deploy feature enabled, and it's running on this device. So right here, this isn't an emulator. This is actually running on my phone right here, and it's just casting to my computer. So the game's running, and you can. Okay. Okay, bear with me. I think the casting, I'm using the Wi-Fi on my phone. Okay, so right here you can see these textures on the little fish right there. There's like a white texture. So let's just test out the texture swapping and the live preview feature there. So here is the current texture that's being used. And then here's this inverted version of it. So I'm just going to copy that over there. And then I'm going to go back into the editor. The editor's going to re-import it. And then hopefully it will reload.
Yeah, this is what happens.
Yeah, this is a Wi-Fi. So we're using the Wi-Fi in the convention center. I'm using it off my phone here. So I think I'm having some connection issues, but hopefully.
It's okay. Maybe after the talk, we can stick around. We'll get it working and show you if you want to. Out in the hall, we'll show you how it works.
Okay.
I know.
That's disappointing. Okay.
It was going to be awesome.
I'm going to try to tinker with it and see if I can get you guys a preview, and then I guess I'll just hand it back over to Steven to wrap up.
Yeah. So and he was also going to show you it doesn't have to just be textures or simple objects. It can also be. I think you had a scriptable object that had some game data.
Yeah.
That you could modify.
Yeah. Well, what I wanted to show you guys is, so this is a scriptable object I was using. I just put some tweaks on it. And you can make changes here, and then they would instantly be reflected. So you could modify gameplay settings such as jump height, slide length, and that sort of thing. So I will try to get that set up in the next couple minutes if I can get a preview for that.
Yeah, we can do it after the talk.
Okay.
Cool. Let's go back to.
Live demos are dangerous. And yeah, thanks, guys.
All right. So, if I can get this working again. And start it up. There you go. All right, thanks, Joe. I can now. Oh man, we're all messed up here. What am I going to do? All right, so just a quick recap of what we saw. So Addressables and Resource Manager helps you flatten the learning curve of loading content in Unity. And it also kind of gets you out of this refactor loop. You write your code once to load it where you need to load it, and then you can separately change how the assets are configured to load, where they're loading from, what bundles they're in, that sort of thing. Then we saw the fast deployment live preview feature almost, and so this is going to accelerate iteration time on deployed devices for you. So a little note on our development process. All these modules we're working on are written in C#. Our little cast guy here can go away, or not. Go away.
Not effective.
And there's going to be source available. So these will all be distributed as separate modules for you, and as little as possible is going into the engine and hidden, tucked away there. We're trying to bubble it all up into C# for you so you can see what's going on, modify it to your needs. So the frequently asked question that's going to happen is, when will this be available? So we're targeting the first half of 2018 for most of this. We're working hard on this. We're really excited to get it in your hands, so we're trying to get it done as fast as we can. So, one more thing. Anybody use the Unity cache server here? Yeah, so yes, you're all pretty familiar with this. Just quick recap on what it is. Unity Cache Server is a small service that runs either locally on your computer or on your LAN, and it's designed to help reduce the time it takes to switch platforms or re-import a project, because as Unity is importing assets, it will write to the cache server the imported version for each platform that it's imported for. So you don't have to do that process over and over again. And then on a networked environment, you can share that process can be shared across many computers, so you can benefit from other people's import processes. So that's what it is. It's been lightly maintained for a long time. I'll say that. So our team recently adopted this tool, and we wanted to do something kind of quickly to improve it and get you guys something a little bit better. So we've done a couple things. First, we published it to GitHub, and it's open source now under Apache 2. And we implemented a full test suite, which implies there wasn't many tests. So we have a full test suite now implemented, so that's great. We've done some code cleanup on it. We fixed some critical bugs. And most importantly, particularly for LAN environments, if you're in a team environment, we've added clustering. So it now runs multi-process. And this, in our testing anyway, made a huge difference if you have more than one person either trying to download and write at the same time, and made a huge difference. And it was not all that complex to implement. So we did that, and it's available now. You can go get it. If you're using it in a LAN, I really encourage you to go pull this down and give it a try. And we'd appreciate your feedback on it if it is improving. And we'll keep making some improvements as we go. So one more thing before I take questions. We have another talk with more live demo excitement at 2 p.m. at room 18C. We're going to talk about 2 tools that you can take a look at and see if they help you with your workflow today. They work in 2017.1 and going forward. The Asset Bundle Browser and the Asset Graph Tool. A couple other of my colleagues are going to be giving that talk. So I encourage you to check that out if you're struggling right now with understanding asset bundles or building workflows around them. So that's it. We have some time for Q&A. So please, if you have a question, use the mic. Yep.
My question is, a lot of times we like to have a high fidelity and a low fidelity asset bundle depending on the device. So low-end devices can work better. Is that something you see supported with this new system?
Yeah, so we will support the existing variant system. However, we are looking at ways to improve that, and we've made some prototypes and we've done some work on that. So yes, we do plan on that. It may be a V2 kind of feature, but it's definitely on our roadmap.
Cool, thanks.
I have a couple questions. One was the Viking Village. I just saw like instantiate async in the code. Does that handle loading the asset bundle and
It handles everything.
everything?
It loads the bundles, even if there's 1,000 dependencies, it loads the asset and then it instantiates it.
There was like a code demo. I assume that was like similar to the one that's on kind of like right now online for like getting the bundle and then the dependencies, like downloading them when they're all downloaded, load them, and then when they're all loaded, now you're good to go.
Yep.
Okay, so that takes
That's
care of all
all.
that.
That's all. The Resource Manager API handles all that for you in the background. You don't.
The
have to
second
do it.
question I have is the live preview. So the editor is going to be running, and then, or the editor will be on my desktop, and then when I need an asset bundle, it'll build it and
That's
cache
right.
it somewhere.
Yes, it'll cache it locally on your. It's a development only feature, right? So it's going to be connected to your local editor and caching bundles as it's building them and sending them to your device.
Normally, building a bundle takes a certain
Well,
amount of
so
time.
right, so we don't build all, like if you have giant bundles, we don't build the whole bundle. We build basically one asset at a
The
time.
piece that's changed.
Yeah, we're basically sending very small amounts of data.
So if I had a bundle that was like a whole city for some reason, I don't know, like maybe my whole environment changes, and I change one texture in it, you're saying you're just going to rebuild like that.
Or we
one
can
texture.
patch that bundle.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a couple questions. You very lightly went over a lot of the network-based asset bundle logic. The cache handling for networked asset bundles, is that the same, or have you made updates to that process?
The cache.
So whenever you download
Yeah.
the asset bundles to Unity Web Request, it caches the asset bundles kind of hidden
Yeah.
in the background. A lot of the documentation is very light on this process. Has anything been changed on that?
So in 2017.1, I think that's right. There is a refresh of that API. There's a lot more control over that cache. So yes, there has been some attention to that, and there's basically a new system that lets you just really precisely control it. However, I'm not really satisfied with that as a long-term solution. What I'd like to do is the big problem, or what I don't like about it, is it's tightly coupled to our Unity web requests. They have to work together. So I want to pull those things apart so that the cache is separate from your downloading. So you can. I want to be more modular, basically. But the new APIs are nice. It solves a lot of the problems, like you can delete individual
Yeah,
bundles.
before it was all or nothing.
Exactly. So.
Another question is regarding failure. So network-based asset bundles, loading those in. What's the process for kind of adding our own failure processes or callbacks for that? Is it all callback system? What's the process?
It's all callbacks right now. So that was one thing we actually added to the engine that wasn't there. The async requests didn't have callbacks. So we added that, and then we built the whole thing on top of callbacks. So you can handle that. And we probably will build in some more kind of features around error handling. We haven't really got to that yet.
And then the build process right now. So what we do is we have our build pipeline that essentially individually builds certain asset bundles that we update. So we can avoid the whole process of building hundreds of asset bundles all at one time. Does the new build pipeline allow for that? It'll allow for, let's say I only want to build the character asset bundles, or I only want to build clothing asset bundles. Does it allow for that kind of granularity?
Yes, it does. I wish we had a whole talk on just the new asset bundle build pipeline, but we don't. But the short answer is yes, it caches everything in individual steps. And the thing you want to do, basically we can generate the whole layout first, and then we can just build any bundle you want to. So it's much more flexible.
And then, so
Can I, let's let some other people ask some questions, and I'm happy to answer some more questions after the talk.
Hi.
Hi.
So let's say you have a decent-sized project that hasn't switched to asset bundles at all, so you're sort of like a mix of those hard references and loading from resources. The answer might be it depends, but do you think, how painful would the switch be from going to nothing to asset bundles, and then going from asset bundles to addressables? Or, in other words, do you think it's worth waiting for addressables to be released before even trying to go to asset bundles?
If you can, I would say yes. You would avoid a lot of having to write a lot of scaffolding code that we're providing for you.
Yeah.
We're very conscious of that transition to addressables from like resources, for instance. In fact, you probably didn't notice, but in the addressables config window, it'll show you that resources are in there, because the resource manager can load from resources also. But we'll have workflows where you can simply move things from resources to addressables. And you'll have to decide where you want them to go, because they'll have to come out of those resources folders. But once they're out, the only difference you have to do is change resources.load to resource-manager.load, or load async or whatever.
Okay.
So it should be very smooth.
So it sounds like it'll be easier to sort of track the process of what you're moving out of resources.
Yes.
Once addressables is there.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so I would say if it's possible, if your timeline is such, like if you're not shipping until late next year, for instance, I would definitely wait.
Okay, thanks.
My question is, this has implications for obviously people who have games where their content is partially streamed over the web to make the download faster. But what about when you have a use case where, let's say, a developer wants to support mods, or something like VR Chat, which is basically Unity asset bundles turned into playable Second Lifestyle multiplayer. You have a use case where multiple developers are trying to kind of harmonize their content. So I wonder, because right now when you pull things from the asset store, this is kind of, I guess, not technically within your department, but it seems really related. If I go to the asset store and I get 3 different assets, I have to say no to 3 different versions of image effects every time. They want their example scene to look good, right?
Right.
But we don't need those image effects over and over. So if the content which you put into bundles has this addressable system, can that function similar to namespaces to avoid collisions between assets from different developers?
Yeah, I don't know that it's exactly the same use case. I mean, so we are working in different areas. Like we are working on a kind of package management system that will eventually, not weave, there's another team doing that, so I don't want to speak for them, but actually just got if you're on the alpha list, there was some talk about that. That's going to handle the dependency management problem with the asset store and will help with some of that, what you're talking about. For the content specifically, I mean, that content would be, asset bundles are the baked out, platform dependent content. So you typically wouldn't be shipping that with asset store stuff anyway, I don't think. So I don't know, maybe we could talk after and we can talk in more detail about those workflows.
Last very quick question. The loading of code, like obviously original asset store rules on iOS prevented any code from being shipped. And what a lot of us did is put text into a text asset and then reconstitute it and then call assembly.load. Basically, we would compile the assembly offered like a desktop game.
Right.
So is there any plan to make compiling of code or like running of new code work within bundles, or has that been added already and I just missed it?
No, it's not added. I don't have an answer for that myself yet. I think Unity doesn't have an official answer for that yet. With mostly going to ahead of time compiled code. I mean, your trick still works on mono, for instance, but there's not right now. There's not an official thing. But
Thanks.
Thank you.
Does the live preview work with code changes or dependency changes at all, or is it just serialized data and asset swaps?
Do you want to address that one?
Go ahead.
Okay. So we're looking at ways to do that. I mean, so the way it kind of works is it builds it builds as little as possible into it takes out all the content. So it kind of splits things up into player data and code, and then all the content separately to be deployed. And it uses a virtual file system. So we're looking at ways to use the virtual file system to deliver, say, the DLLs or the most of the code as well. So at worst, you might have to restart your app. So that's the plan. We don't have that working yet, but that's where we'd like to head.
Thank you. So just a slight frame of reference change. Rather than picturing it as working with game engines or game software, I'm working with engineering and BIM. A lot of our products are non-disclosure clause protected with our clients. So right now I'm working with a REST API to protect specific clients having access to specific data. We're
Okay.
also running asset bundles through FTP. Is the new system going to be REST API and URL friendly?
Well, the new system doesn't really address the server side of things. So there's still a requirement. I mean, we will generate the bundles that you then need to do something with. The configuration for actually connecting to the thing and downloading the thing, there'll be a simple one that's configured for like basically open HTTP access. But if you have some very specific requirements, the nice thing is these groups, these bundle groups, and the backing code, it's very modular. So you can basically create a subclass of our basic one, and then add whatever you need to support your kind of network requirements in that regard. So the configuration will all stay the same. You just might have to write a little code to support your specific client-server model.
Okay.
Let me try this again.
Is it going to work?
I don't know. Hopefully. All right. I don't like giving up. All right.
Awesome.
So let's just pick up where we left off and pretend that whole thing didn't happen. Hopefully it won't happen again. All right.
We'll edit the tape. Except you're...
What happened to my fish? Oh, there he goes. Okay. All right, so back here you can see those fish are white. Paste the inverted fish texture in. What are my computers doing?
Oh, it's slow.
Okay.
Is it going to work? Is it going to work? Joe.
Just worked a second ago.
It worked while we were talking?
Yeah, let's.
We should have had it running up on the screen while we were talking, so people could have seen it. I'll take another question while he's fighting that.
Yeah, don't look at it and it'll work.
I want to thank the folks who asked questions ahead of me because they covered a lot of what I was going to ask.
Okay.
So this may actually be part of the last thing you talked about, but we're building a thin client that we want to load, ideally arbitrary content, right? And will this new system, we've already written a lot of code to facilitate that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing this is going to change a lot of that. Will it make it easier? Is it scriptable, all this
Yes.
API?
Yeah, and that's a nice thing. In the resource manager, we've the way that it's configured, it's very modular and kind of interface based. So we've written modules for downloading and asset bundles with Unity Web Request, loading from local disks. We've written various what we call providers of data. But these providers are just an implementation of an interface. So you can write your own provider. So when you supply an address, it goes through a locator to find a location. Then the location is loaded by a provider, and there's a match there. So you can have a provider that does whatever you want. We made some example ones where we can load raw texture data from a server and then create a texture object, in Unity. So it doesn't have to be an asset bundle necessarily. And the code you have to write is pretty easy and very localized to plug into the resource manager. And then you get all the benefits of the profiler and everything else. Everything just works.
Sounds great. Does it handle HTTPS and authentication and stuff like that? We're going to drill into a secure server to pull some of these assets. So.
That's more of a question if Unity Web Request supports all that stuff. I believe it does on most platforms. But you can, and we also wrote one that bypasses Unity Web Request and uses the .NET System HTTP class, which can do whatever you want. So so it's very flexible. If it doesn't support precisely what you need, you can dive in and do that.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I see bluefish. Go ahead.
So I have two questions for you.
Yeah.
One of them is, and I can see you guys are addressing it, is duplicate assets across bundles.
Yes.
And just what the strategies are that you're using to determine where they go or how they're deduplicated.
Uh-huh. So kind of out of the box, we don't want to have a whole lot of magic happening. We don't want to automatically deduplicate in some schema that may not match what you need. But we're going to have tools that you can run to do that. And there's a couple of ways to do it. One, we can, for instance, if you have a bunch of groups of assets that are all bundles, you could take those and run a process to create a common group that has all your deduplicated assets. But you would have to run that whenever you wanted to do that yourself. So if you know what's happening, it's static. But there's another thing with the new build pipeline where we can do very, very precise object-level deduplication across the entire build process. And so that's something that's kind of globally you can turn on, and then you can select, well, what do you do with these deduplications, and we'll allow you to configure that. So yeah, we're thinking about that in a couple of different ways.
My second question is simply for the addressable assets. For type safety, is there like a generic version of it that we can use that says like you can only apply our scriptable object type or a prefab or otherwise into those serializable parameter or serializable fields?
Actually, I don't know if we've implemented that yet. Like for the asset reference type, for instance. Yeah. We did implement I think the one thing we did there's many things we could do is we made it to where it can only come from a certain label. Like only addressable assets that are labeled a certain way can be applied to this asset reference.
And that's done via an attribute that says to restrict it to a certain label, so you can say, okay, this only works with characters.
So if we decided to go a route of kind of, I guess, using a certain type, it would be, I'm just going to apply that category or that tag to those types on my own, essentially.
Sure, yeah. And like I said, there may be other ways that make sense that we could add different types of restrictions.
Thank you.
Okay. We have time for one more question.
Hi. Live preview, will that also work with console?
Yes, that's the idea, is that any platform that's connected to the editor, it should be able to work. It's not platform specific. When it works.
Yeah, when it rolls out was what I was going to ask. So
yes.
It won't be an add-on later. It'll.
No. Well, okay. So what I don't want to happen, we won't wait for live preview if addressables and resource manager are ready to go. We will get those out, but our intent is to give you all this at the same time.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you guys for coming. We'll be hanging outside if you want to ask more questions.
When this is plugged in,